everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
Hey, it's Jackie.
How's everyone doing?
So good.
I'm feeling really great. I'm all the way to the number one spot in my leaderboard.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Jackie, stop. She's flossing and orange justicing, all these fabulous game dances.
Yeah.
From hit game Fortnite. Diana, put down that Pong machine.
It's down.
I got none of those references. I'm so old.
You don't get Fortnite references?
Nope.
I was at a local, I don't know if it's minor league or whatever they call it for hockey, in Worcester, which is nearby to us. And pretty much every time they put a bunch of kids on the Jumbotron, they would just all get up and floss.
Still
like back
flossing?
and forth. Everyone was doing it.
Over.
No, it's cute though. It's like little kids do. But it like moved from like, I think, teenagers to like children under 10 who may or may not have ever played Fortnite. It's really cute.
Well, my 10-year-old told me Fortnite's over.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
That's what he was playing for like an hour this morning on this snowy day.
He told me it's over, guys.
Oh, okay.
It's over.
Well, unlike most of our tangents, this one actually is related to the topic that we will be reviewing. ABA Inside Track. Every week, we take a topic in the behavior analytic field and we talk about journal articles related to that topic. And usually we start with a random tangent, but this week we actually started with a relevant tangent because we're talking about gamification.
It was tangentially related.
It was tangentially related. Yeah, so Fortnite would not be an example of gamification so much as an example of a game. A video game.
So what are we talking about this week?
Gamification. Gamification, and we'll talk about what gamification is. But first, I want to clue our listeners into what articles we will be discussing. Now, a preview about the overall gist of the episode. Gamification is hot. It's very popular. And there is a lot of research related to gamification, but if you dig deeply into the research, you will find that most of it is not particularly great research on how gamification works, if gamification works, why gamification works. So
it's an emerging field.
It's an emerging field, yes.
I think we should say.
That's a kinder way to say it.
Right. So initially, when a new area of research is sort of getting started, it does look a little bit like a house of cards, right? Because some of the initial articles are things like, we should study this. Has anyone else studied this? This seems like a cool topic. Here's some ways that you could study this. And then once those are out there, then often the actual like research ball gets rolling where you can end up with some like hardcore tangible data in your hands down the road. So we're sort of at that like tipping point right now.
A cusp.
Is what we're thinking in this area of research. And we're sort of hoping that we might further inspire more of that actual data.
Yeah. And so the things that in previous literature or previous reviews of gamification literature, they were looking at socially significant problems, right? So problems of obesity and problems of environmental conservation. And this is a way that we can get our foot in the door, right, as behavior analysts, because these are problems and they're behaviors that we can solve.
Maybe. I mean, we'll see. I think everyone would rather much hear people's self-reports as
that is true.
From the current literature we mostly could find. So in any case, I just wanted to let our our listeners know is that even though we have 4 citations that we'll be discussing in a little more depth today, we won't be going into a ton of depth in all of them because some of them kind of go outside of what we would consider appropriate for behavior analysis and sort of are more, touchy-feely psychological, but they did have some points worth, I think, reviewing that could be used in further behavior analytic research. The 4 articles that we'll be talking about today are Gamification, the intersection between behavior analysis and game design technologies by Morford, Witts, Killingsworth, Alavosius, and that's from the Behavior Analyst 2014. We'll also be talking about Fogel, Miltenberger, Graves, and Kohler from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis 2010 and an article entitled The Effects of Exergaming on Physical Activity Among Inactive Children in a Physical Education Classroom. And then 2 less-known journals for us. One's not even in a journal, actually. How Gamification Motivates, an experimental study of the effects of specific game design elements on psychological need satisfaction by Saylor, Hense, Mayr, and Mandi. And that's from Computers in Human Behavior 2017. And finally, we will be reviewing a talk. It's a written up talk, I guess, given at the 2014 47th Hawaii International Conference on System Science, which I wouldn't have read, except it got cited a lot in any research that came after 2014. called Does Gamification Work? A literature review of empirical studies on gamification by Hamari, Koivisto, and Sarsa. And those are our articles. If you would like a good time, Hamari, the first author on that one, he has published extensively on gamification, and I feel like he likes video games a lot because I'm pretty sure one of the pictures I found of him, he was in some sort of like a cloak, like a like a druid or something.
Nice. Maybe he plays.
He does some LARPing.
Yeah.
It's possible. They're from the University of Tampere, which I was like, where is that? That sounds like it's from Tampa. Are they in Florida? No, it's in Finland.
Oh.
Which
it's just cold in Finland.
Maybe it could be. I don't know. It seems like Finland would be kind of a magical type land where you might, dress up like you're in, an old fairy tale because that's that part of the world.
Right.
Let's get started with a review of gamification, or what gamification is. And it's a little tricky in that, like Diana said, it's a newer topic, meaning there isn't necessarily the definition of gamification. There are some that I think most of the articles sort of agreed upon. This is what gamification is. There were some differences, but we're going to talk a little bit about what gamification is and some of the components of gamification. The easiest definition would be the use of game design elements within non-game contexts. So that's kind of the most basic definition of gamification.
I liked the one, implementation of game design elements in real-world context for non-gaming purposes.
There you go. That's pretty similar.
That was my favorite.
Okay. Donna, how about you? What's your favorite definition of gamification? Or a definition?
My favorite may be the one that Jackie just read. No. My favorite is... gamification is a way to engineer the real world by arranging contingencies to bring about game playing, i.e. gamefulness, in a context in which game playing does not normally occur, e.g. grocery shopping or exercising.
I like that.
From
go.
the Morford et al. Article.
Since gamification is new, and not all of our listeners, I think, are very familiar with the idea of gamification, or possibly even video games themselves, though.
What?
I think Jackie's playing video games right now. I see her on her phone.
I am. I was looking at my Fitbit sleep.
Nice.
That's a form of gamification.
It's a form of
It
gamification.
is.
We have a couple basic definitions that I wanted to go over, and these came from that Sailor article. The first is, what's a game? And one definition of a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. So that's sort of the most cold definition of any game whatsoever that one might play. Elements refers to pieces of the games in the context, the significant pieces of games, the components that are common in many games. So that would be things like rules, maybe pieces.
Right.
These would all be elements, characters, points.
Turns.
Yep. The design, so the reference to design is has to do sort of with the process of the activity of kind of creating a game rather than sort of technological components that might make up a game. So we're not talking about design of like, how do you code to make a video game or a gamified experience, but more, what is the process? What are the activities that you go into playing that game?
By making it more game-like.
By
so
making it
something
more
that's
game-like,
non-gamey.
Well, it could originally it was not gamey, and
Yeah.
then whether it's actually a game meant to just be enjoyed or a game
Right.
meant to gamify some sort of a boring task. And then again, non-game contexts, it's sort of a non-specific term, but it refers to anytime you're using these processes and it's not for the purpose of creating a game. So you wouldn't say, I made Fortnite, I gamified Fortnite, because no, Fortnite is a game. The purpose of it is just to play the game and have fun. Gamification has to be in a context that is not, I made this for the purpose of playing a game. It has to be to something else that already exists.
To increase motivational influences on behavior.
Yeah, I've never seen, they defined a lot of the term motivation, they defined it in like a million different ways in these articles, depending
Yeah.
on who was writing it. It was really fun to try to translate.
Yeah, that gets a little bit tricky. So the Morford article also breaks down what the components of gaming are, which I thought was really helpful. And they make the distinction first and foremost of what is a game versus what is game playing behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you just reviewed, Rob, was kind of like the pieces of a game,
Yep.
right? And they give those definitions too, although they define them in like even more specific ways. And they're pulling that research from an article called Deterring 2011.
Yeah, and he seemed to be the man who was...
Is it a guy?
I think it's a guy. He seemed to be the individual who was popularized the idea of gamification, or the term, though. Again, there's gamification even in the Java article. Pieces of gamification have existed probably since the late 2000s, the 2010. But he sort of wrote the article that everyone seemed to cite about gamification as a process.
When I was reading these articles, I felt like everyone went to that conference and they're like, ooh, we're going to cite this person.
Totally. So I think those are like the same basics idea, and we don't have to go over that again. But everyone's been interested in the idea of gaming for a while, but it hasn't always gone by the term gamification.
Humans have loved games since 2000 BC when they would play an...
Well, I did even write down the opening line of this Morford article because I love it. And it's just, quote, "Many enduring problems we face as a society require innovative solutions," end quote.
Like I'm starting on a ride at Epcot.
That's when you're staring at the blank screen and you're like, what am I going to say in my paper? Start big.
Webster's defines gamification as.
But they did. This is a really nicely written article, and I loved it for that reason. And they like walked us through, because you know how it is when you're like, let's start trying to like hack away at this nebulous thing and end up with something concrete. Like that's what they had to do with the gamification, because it's not been that well defined.
This was a thorough article in terms of
really thorough.
What is gamification. Here's some information about research in gamification. Let's talk about the future of gamification. Here are examples of gamification.
Yes. So this article is very optimistic about the place that gamification could take in our overall society. And they harken back to Skinner, too, 1984, where he was talking about the value of games.
Have you read those? Because I read those quotes sort of like, did Skinner really write a lot about video games? Because he would have been really old. I kind of imagine him being like, these damn video games and you kids and your video games.
He said that they're excellent at contingency programming. Yeah. What is reinforcing is successful play, and in a well-designed instructional program, he pulls it back, right? So just like personalized program of instruction.
Yeah.
Students will gobble up their assignments because it's, there's immediate consequences, everything that he loves.
Yeah, and he's talking about the automaticity of reinforcement of those types of enjoyable activities, like watching television or playing games or looking at art or playing music. Like all of those things are self-reinforcing, so they're likely to continue.
And that quote was, I think, 84.
Yeah.
So that was just to give everyone a sense of when he would have said that. That is before the original Nintendo Entertainment System came out in America.
Thanks, Skinner.
So this is...
So you're saying...
like post Space Invaders?
Yeah.
Space Invaders came out in 1978.
Okay. So what you're saying
I didn't even research that, guys. I just know that.
Thank God.
So what are you saying is Skinner created Nintendo? I'm just kidding.
It may have been out. I think it might have been out. I think it was out in Japan.
No, but that wouldn't that
but
be
in America.
funny?
In America, you're still playing your Atari 2600. Your ColecoVision.
Oh, so I think I said a little while back, gamification is a new term, but people have been attempting to study the value of adding gaming contingencies in to increase or decrease behavior for a while. Not that long, but prior to this 2010 point in time where gamification really took over. So prior terms, if anyone's interested in going back in the literature and looking up, were serious games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I hadn't heard that term. That was the most commonly used term.
That when I looked into it, it seemed like it was referring to games that were meant to like teach you something interesting. So it made me kind of think of like a Carmen Sandiego kind of game.
Yeah.
Anything produced by the Ravensburger company.
Like Snail-based race.
Race. Okay, but that was a fairly commonly used term. Persuasive games was out there, and then alternate reality games, which isn't virtual reality.
Right.
It probably got too complicated, so they did away with that term too. But even
they still exist. Alternate reality games, but they're more like when you have your cell phone up and you're like, ooh, there's Pokemon on your head.
Oh, like Pokemon Go? That's alternate
I think that
reality.
would be considered alternate reality or augmented reality. Maybe they're not considered the same in terms of research and how they're used popularly.
Yeah. But even this research was only in the 2000s. 07 was one of the earliest articles that they cited using these alternate terms. So it's still relatively new, but if you're looking around and you want to go back and find old articles, you might need to use serious games as your terminology for that.
One thing that I loved about this research is that they said that on average, a 21-year-old may have averaged over 10,000 hours of video games.
Yeah.
And so since people are playing a lot of video games, we should probably, as behavior analysts, consider this as part of a important part of society. And so we should grab hold of it and use it to our benefit.
Yeah. They also talked about behavior analysts really being uniquely positioned to break apart what's actually going on in video games and to be able to talk about the rules and contingencies in a way that eventually could streamline the field of gamification such that we could all share a terminology and talk about it with technological precision.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the other thing that the Morford, they broke down games like you just did, Rob, with basically the same types of categories. Yep. Then they also went on to talk about what's the function of games. But when we talk about games and the function of games, we quickly get into the same territory that we do when we talk about play and the function of play, right? It seems easy, and then it's actually not. It's actually really hard.
And then it's a nightmare.
Right. So, trying to functionally define play for children is really complex, and this kind of falls into the same category. So children like to play. They like to engage in games. They seem to be automatically reinforcing on some level. However, there is also a larger function to that in that they teach rules of cooperation and socialization for participation in society as you age. So there, I did it, guys. Jeez, was that so hard? Done. Morford and colleagues also go on to break down game playing behavior into 6 different important components, right? And this is kind of where they start to get into how would we operationally define game playing behavior. And I thought this was really helpful. So I'm going to run through the 6 with y'all, and you can chime in as you want to. So these are the 6 critical characteristics of game playing, which we can sort of think of as making up an operational definition. So the first one is that there is a direct impact on the game outcome and results by playing the game. So it's not static every time, but the way that the game progresses and who wins or loses depends on the people playing the game, right? So that would makes it more fun, obviously, than just having it end the same way every time.
And here it's nice that the consequences are immediate, and typically conjugate schedules will be used. So here this means that the magnitude of the consequence is going to be directly related to the magnitude of the response.
Okay.
So
and that's from his Morgan 2010 article.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. I wonder if that falls in line with the matching law.
I wonder if it does.
Oh, interesting topic someone could talk about. Okay. Number 2, there are clear goals and or end conditions for the game. So you're working towards some goal and or some end to the game. And everyone knows generally what that goal is. Number 3, there are established rules and or barriers in the game. Everyone needs to be following the rules of the game, and there may be barriers as far as what types of behavior you can engage in the game. This is intended to limit players' variability in their responding. So you have to operate within the rules of the game. And you know, if you ever play with children, that they follow those rules, right? And if someone acts outside of the rules of the game, you are going to hear an earful because they like to follow the rules of the game.
I like that too.
Otherwise, it's not fair.
Right.
Even when they follow the rules of the game, if they're losing, it's also
very often not fair.
Yeah. What I love about this too is that you create barriers to restrict that response variability, and that may ultimately end up in character death if you. That's one of the things that they said, which I like, is you don't want to die. If you follow the rules, you are more likely to not die in your game.
It depends on the type of game.
That's
Sometimes you die anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Number 4 is that there is a probabilistic outcome.
So here there's a use of variable schedules of reinforcement and punishers for activities within the game. So you don't know exactly what's going to happen. So it's not every response will lead to some sort of reinforcer or punisher. So just like that intermittent schedule.
Indiscriminable contingencies at play.
Yeah. Which makes the game more interesting. And so there's going to be more responding because of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 5 is the development of strategies and heuristics. What a great word.
I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up.
I always have to look that word up, and then I forget because I don't use it that often.
So this article said that they're verbal rules that describe one's strategies. Do you agree?
Sure.
Heuristics, I always think of it as like the parameters in which one operates.
Oh, yeah. So I guess that would be That would make sense.
Yeah.
I had to look it up, though, because I didn't know it. I was like, oh, I love
It's a funny word.
I love how it sounds.
Yeah.
I'm going to use it in a sentence today.
I was like that for a long time with paradigm.
Oh, I like that with phenomenon.
Phenomenon. Phenomenon.
Anyway.
Along the course of gameplay, players can develop their own strategies and or heuristics in order to do two things. They're going to evaluate the state of the game, so how are they doing in relation to other players in the game or the end goal of the game, and they can also alter the probabilities of different outcomes based on their behavior, as well as what the behavior of their opponent or partner is.
And this happens a lot in regular gaming. I mean, I don't play video games, but I have someone that I am close to that does.
Mm-hmm.
And he will frequently go back and like replay games to see what would happen if he turned right instead of left.
Mm-hmm.
Like he
I know
save
someone
games.
like that too.
Yeah. Huh.
If you're talking about me, Dan, I hate to tell you, but you play way more video games than I do these days because you're constantly playing something on your phone. So don't look over here.
Yeah, but it's improving my mental
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. It's
abilities.
It's great for you.
Okay. They also talk about what it means to have a strategy in a game, and I liked that they kind of broke this down. So they say that
Me too.
You're developing a pattern of responding, and that pattern can be either verbal or nonverbal, but it's based on the history of reinforcement within the game. So if something's been working for you, then you're likely going to continue to do that, right? Or you may be doing problem solving or covert reasoning related to engaging in that behavior. And then suddenly if the gameplay changes and your partner or your opponent is suddenly winning, then you're going to alter your strategy and make it a little bit different or more complex. So you can build upon what you know in the game to change how you respond. Okay, and then number 6 is, and this one was really interesting, guys. So the last component that is going to define game playing behavior is non-coerced initiation of the game. So that means that in order for it to be a game, the person who's playing it should be able to enter into the game or end the game whenever they so choose. So it's not something that they're required to do. And I thought that was interesting, particularly when we think about, well, we're going to talk about research, right? So, I mean, I guess with research, technically you're able to enter or leave at any point in time, but there's always like that structure, right? Like we're playing this game and we're going to be doing this together. And so it's easy to enter in and you value entering in that arrangement with someone else, right? And sort of being in this contractual game playing with them. So it's difficult, easy to enter into, difficult to leave is kind of part of it too. But technically you could leave at any time. Technically. And they give the example of a child whose parents want him to play soccer. And he's told them repeatedly that he doesn't like to play soccer, but he's still going to the soccer games, even though he doesn't really want to, because he doesn't want his parents to be upset with him. So they said in that context, that would not count as game playing because he doesn't actually want to. He's basically being coerced to participate.
So those are our 6 elements that were discussed. Mm-hmm. Why don't we take a quick break and then we'll come back and talk about how you can use those elements in the gamification process.
Cool.
We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we're back talking about gamification and the elements of games and how gamification can be used and all sorts of fun topics. Before we get into some actual examples of gamification, why don't we take a second to review a little game we like to play called, Hey, would you like to get some CEs from ABA Inside Track?
I didn't know where you were coming from there, and that's funny.
Did you like that? Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Yes, ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. So by listening to our episodes on behavior analytic research, you can actually get CEs. You just go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, and you need to enter some information, including 2 secret code words we've hidden throughout the episodes. Can you find them? Click all over your iPhone. Maybe they'll show up. Not really. Just listen and you'll hear them if you listen intently. The first of those is Luigi. Luigi. Luigi, Mario's brother. Remember Luigi, guys? Luigi?
Oh, yeah, man.
He's green. Remember the year of Luigi? Do you know, tragically, the year of Luigi was actually the worst financial year for Nintendo in a very long time. So, poor Luigi.
No, I don't remember that, but I remember when in one of the recent versions of Mario Kart, he made that super angry face.
Oh, yeah, the Death Stare
Right.
Luigi? That was a meme for a while, yeah.
That was pretty popular. And then we have a T-shirt for our younger son that says "Little brothers get Luigi."
Yep, that's true. Luigi. So we just talked. Diana just shared the 6 elements of games and game design and gameplay behavior. So you might wonder, what does that have to do with gamification? And I think some of them do lend themselves nicely. You know, when you were talking about some of the kind of behavior analytic underpinnings that might be occurring there. But most of, I think, the research on gamification kind of talks about the same few elements or pieces of the games, and those are pretty specific as to these are added to a task and it gamifies them, and those are, really quickly, points, badges and achievements, leaderboards, performance graphs, meaningful stories, avatars, and teammates. So those are typically like the pieces of those elements that will be thrown into a task to say they've been gamified. You know, hey, you clicked this thing, you get 10 points. Hey, the story is, don't you want to finish this lesson really quickly so you get a good grade? You can make an avatar. Look at you with blue hair. And then badges are things like, great job, you unlocked 100 answers correct, and let's put you on the leaderboard. You have the most badges, so show everyone that you're better than them at whatever this boring task is.
And I read that one of the most important elements is the story.
It can be, although that, again, it depends on sort of what the task is and what the story is. I like stories in my games, so I assume I would like stories in my gamified activities, but other people like badges, other people like leaderboards.
Dissemination station
Right.
hint, right? We don't know.
I'll hang on to that then.
We don't know. So these are kind of the components of games that you will see in gamification. So we're going to kind of refer to these a lot. I found, looking at this, we're going to talk about a solid research article from Java about the idea of exergaming. But Diana and I, when we were sort of doing a little bit of prep work, we were looking for actual examples. And one of them was mentioned in the Behavior Analyst, the Morford article in the Behavior Analyst, Super Better. So we looked a little bit into what is Super Better. Jackie, have you used Super Better or heard of Super Better before?
I've heard of it, but I've not used it.
It's an app or a book. It's all sorts of things meant to gamify your life into a series of quests, and it focuses on, you can set goals for yourself. There's a lot of public posting on Facebook.
You can be a winner at the game of life.
Yeah, pretty much. It did seem to have some components.
Kids and taxes. Remember that?
I do remember that.
Will you be rich when the game is through?
I got to the end and I sold all my kids or whatever. You get money for them, I think.
Yeah.
It's a good way to get some bonuses. It kind of had some work that sounded similar to some of the work in acceptance and commitment therapy of like accepting these things are true. And it was someone it was a developer who just had done a lot of development of games, and she had a concussion and sort of was like, what if I treat my life like a game? And then made an app, and then all sorts of people liked it. And it sort of has these components like you would consider chunks of your life, like you can get a power up, and they're sort of quick things to make you feel better. There are bad guys, and think about the bad guys being things that get in the way of your goals. And an epic win is a goal you've set for yourself in your life. So instead of, like a regular goal you'd set, treat it like a video game goal. And
Rob, not all who wander are lost.
So that's one example that we found. The other was this game Classcraft, and they had all sorts of movies because they really wanted us to do Classcraft.
This looks super cool.
It pretty much looked like a video game version of your classroom.
I love that. What is an epic win?
Well, that's a super better. So Classcraft, it's free. If you want analytics, it's $8 a month. But it pretty much is like a classroom management role-playing game. So the kids are broken up into teams, and they have these like fantasy avatars, and they'll do tasks, and you can... I didn't quite get it, but like you can set like learning tasks. There's some like personalized systems of instruction piece to it. If you break rules, you lose health points or HP, and if you die, then you might have a consequence like, you got to go to detention. But your teammates can help you out by giving you like a potion, and that gives them points because they're collaborating on something together. And it really just, when I saw the video, it really just looked like teachers who had actually said, you know what? It seemed like it was more gamified for the teachers in terms of, man, writing rules for my students to follow is so hard. What if it were a video game? So I'm clicking on a little button saying you followed the rule, you didn't follow the rule. And they're in teams, kind of like the good behavior game. So it really just felt like it was like, let's make a video game version of the boring tasks of I made some rules for my classroom and I hold kids accountable and I make sure to give them social praise and, contingent rewards for following those rules. And I have punishments and they lose points. Like they did work like this with kids who had trouble with the court systems back in the 80s where like everything was worth a point. You lost points, you gained points, you earned privileges, you didn't earn privileges. So it just seemed like a really fancy way to do it. It kind of looked like the World of Warcraft.
Yeah,
game,
it's all
which is what
souped
they were
up,
going
so
for.
everyone has their little avatar, and
Yep.
you can be different types of characters.
Now, the issue that we run into with both of these is some kind of like big publicly known, as far as I could tell, at least one of them was in the Morford article, examples of gamification is that, do they do anything? And kind of, maybe, sort of, yeah,
How
a
would
little
you define
bit.
anything?
And I think that's the issue, is that a lot of times they're defining it. There's a link on the Classcraft site about, this scientist from Rutgers said that it is amazing for social emotional learning. And how do they measure the social emotional learning? Well, he has a list of good social emotional learning skills, and he thinks this game lines up with those social emotional learning skills. So that's not really a research article. 100% of 875 teachers polled say their classroom had more fun using this. Okay.
That's good.
82% reported better attendance. But again, a lot of these researchers really self-report. SuperBetter did have a study in...
was a randomized controlled study conducted by the University of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Yes, so they did do an RCT on a control version, a special version which used cognitive behavior therapy techniques, and then just I think the regular version of SuperBetter, which is a lot of like positive self-esteem statements.
Yeah.
And there was a significant difference in the report of how much better they were doing. The students were doing. There was one that was people online. And there was one for kids who had concussions.
Yeah.
There were two different ones. One was at Ohio State, I believe. And then one was the University of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so they reported better mood. They reported less concussion symptoms for at least the study with the children with concussions or the teens with concussions.
I like this. It increases belief in the ability to successfully achieve goals. Mm-hmm. Not if they achieve their goals, but if
Just
they believe that they could.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, a lot of it being self-report. The study with the students with concussion, that seems a little more actual reporting on something, but again, I think a lot of it is going to be the report of how they feel with the concussion. Are they having the same symptoms that you would expect to see as part of the healing process from a concussion? Again, not that there's research pointing to gamification doesn't work, but the research there is generally points to it seems to lead to better reports of a lot of factors, but not consistently or not even necessarily looking at did it change human behavior by including these gamification stats. Right. So even with there was an article, a European article, looking at like there was more cooperative behavior from the students. As far as I could read from the article, the cooperative behavior was very much in the context of playing this Classcraft game, which didn't necessarily mean the kids were engaging in more cooperative behavior in real life. They just were clicking on the buttons that had to do with cooperative tasks. I might have misread it because I think a lot of the research on gamification is coming out of Europe, and I can't tell if it's translated super well. So some of the phrasing seems odd. So as far as we can tell, these two big examples of gamification seem to work in some respect, but is it a socially significant difference? For example, if you just had a teacher who was like, I make good rules in my classroom and I go around and I'm very clear to my students when they are or are not following those rules and they earn rewards and they don't earn rewards or they have punishments, would they get the same results as the teacher who uses the Classcraft system? Because again, the components make perfect sense as to why Classcraft or something like that might work. But is it because it's gamified, or is it just, hey, someone actually went to the trouble of making a easy and cool way to run classroom behavior management system? Is there anything inherently special about the gamification component? So Jackie found a fabulous study back from 2010 referring to exergaming, which doesn't use gamification because that wasn't necessarily the term to use at the time, but has a lot of those components. And this is one of the, again, I think the few studies that does look at actual change in behavior in a very nice and straightforward behavior analytic research means.
Yeah, so here what they did is they wanted to look at the effects of exergaming on physical activity. And so what I want to do is kind of quickly go over what they did in the study and then talk about how they could have expand on this study, or how you, listeners, dear listeners, could expand on this study to make exergaming into the gamification article that we're so looking for but couldn't find. So they had 4 fifth grade students, 2 girls and 2 boys, and some of them were going to regular PE class. Some of them were going to the gamified exergamed class. So all that meant was in PE, they were just doing PE, right? Listening to the teacher, kicking balls, dancing, whatever, line dancing. You guys line dance in PE?
We square dance.
Oh, I did that
in
too.
Texas.
No, we did not do dancing.
You didn't have any girls at your school.
No, my high school. I did in my elementary school.
That's funny. So the dependent variable here was the total minutes engaged in physical activity and the total minutes provided for physical activities during each condition, both the physical education class and the exergaming classes. So they define physical activity as moving a large muscle group during an assigned task. So that could be running, biking, throwing, squatting, kicking, jumping. They have like a whole list. And so what they did is they just alternated PE class and exergaming, and then looked at the duration of physical activity. And so for exergaming, it was just like the PE class, except that they had stations in which there were games that they could play.
Right.
And so that's really all that they did. So the games were Dance Dance Revolution, and I loved that game.
DDR.
So this was a dance pad, and you would dance along, and there was like a little pad, and it could see if you were doing it right or wrong. There was Gamer Size with Sony PlayStation, Batman and Robin. They played Game Cycle, Electronic Sports Dogfighter Simulator. That one seems weird, but it's a bike that you get to ride. Virtual Bike, Nintendo Wii Sports. We've all played
Wii Sports. That's the best-selling game of all time at one point.
Yep.
Because if you bought a Wii, you got Wii Sports.
Yep. Baseball, tennis, and boxing. And then iTech Fitness, X-Board, and 3Kick. So these are all the exergaming stations that they looked at. And what they found was that students engaged in more total minutes of exergaming, all of them across the board, than physical activity. And what was also surprising is that they also had more opportunities to engage in physical activity than the traditional physical education class, probably because they're not waiting for anything. So the things that are missing here, the elements that we talked about that are missing that could make this an example of gamification, is we don't know if they use the leaderboard in Dance Dance Revolution, right? So sometimes in Dance Dance Revolution there is that leaderboard. I always tried to get number 1.
But there are points. Dance Dance Revolution, it grades you per game, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but we don't know if they use that.
It didn't specify that they got the points, or got a grade at the end. They didn't get the graph of here's your goods, here's your excellence, here's your bads. And
so we know, because we've played Dance Dance Revolution, that is available, but we don't know if they used it as part of this. We don't know if they unlocked any badges. If you unlock badges in Dance Dance Revolution, you get access to secret dances.
You seem to know quite a lot about this game.
Dude, I loved it. There was this arcade near my house in college. And I used to go. I used to be that girl. I'd be like, no, I am monopolizing Dance Dance Revolution. I was so bad at it, though. So we don't know if there was that competition piece against yourself or someone else with the badges. We also don't know if the graphs were there. There's not really a meaningful story in Dance Dance Revolution.
No, this was more just they had the opportunity to play all of these games, and some of the games had points or achievements embedded
avatars
within them. But
there were avatars.
Because you could pick a character. Well, in the regular Dance Dance Revolution, you could pick a character.
Right.
Yeah. And really, when we're talking about gamification, we're talking about like there's this overarching quest or story that everyone's following in the class, and you're going to get there at different times, or you're going to work cooperatively to get there. Let's say.
So, Dance Dance Revolution could do that, right? You have to dance your way to.
Right,
help.
they just had different stations, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't any like
cooperativeness.
You're in the gamified class.
No, and technically, Dance Dance Revolution wouldn't be considered gamification because it in itself is a game. However, the process of exercising and moving your body, you can kind of fit it in as like, well, yeah, but let's consider it gamification because any movement could be considered exercise, really.
Right. And if the students were already inactive, that could be a benefit, right? To something they don't necessarily want to do in their real life. And so we're gamifying something in a non-gaming context in order to make the probability of engaging in that response higher.
It's like with Wii Sports. I remember there used to be all those stories when the Wii was super hot of, I lost 50 pounds because I played Wii Sports. And again, Wii Sports is not necessarily an example. It's not an example of gamification. It's an example of a game. However, you need to engage in certain components. So one could say it's sort of, you kind of backwards. Oh, well, yeah, I guess I gamified exercise. We didn't mean to. It just sort of happened.
Right. And what we
I only play bowling, so I don't think that affords you any.
So you just had the anecdotes where you hucked your Wii remote at the TV and broke it.
No, that's why you have to have the wrist strap.
You got tennis elbow from Wii bowling. So I think, and because we don't actually know the vital components that are necessary for gamification, I think right now we could make an argument that some of these may be gamification in parentheses because we don't have that research to support that we need all of these elements as part of the gamification yet. Right?
And again, I think, Jackie, that article cites a very nice, clear review of we used these programs, we used these games, and we saw a change in responding. And there were a few articles we're not going to discuss them. There was one about in terms of sustainability. I think it was mentioned in the Morford article, like power manager. It was power line. There was something about
power.
It was something about actually trying to gamify saving electricity or not using too much electricity.
Power.
Okay, that's what it was called. Sorry.
Or powerhouse.
Power agent was another one, right?
Yeah.
And
that
I
was in Sweden.
I think I found the original, that research, but since it was from Sweden, it didn't translate super well, but it did look like, the folks playing the gamified version of saving power and seeing where they were in the leaderboards did seem to save more electricity than their neighbors who weren't playing the game. We talked about that in our Going Green episode way back when, the idea of, the leaderboard about, hey, you're saving more electricity than your terrible neighbors who are wasting electricity. That did seem to have an effect. There were some other articles on that seemed to have an effect on power usage in houses.
It's all about, changing what the short-term contingencies are and how reinforcing or punishing they may be for someone when we're really trying to make an effect change on long-term contingencies. So it's much better for someone to just use all the power that they want to, right? Because it makes them more comfortable at the time. But if you can add in another layer of what do we find reinforcing here? If you find beating your neighbors in the energy consumption competition more reinforcing, that might be more likely to change behavior here in the present.
The question then becomes, we found these like little articles, some of which have components of, really controlled research, some of which are looking more at self-report, some of which have randomized control studies, but again, are looking at a specific population that is either, in the interest, they're trying to feel better, so they're going to probably have better self-report if you tell them, you can do nothing, or you can do this thing, they're probably going to report, this thing seemed better than doing nothing was. You get that kind of, not exactly a placebo effect, but you do get kind of a self-selecting group, like the super better studies. They referred to the people as a self-selecting group.
Begs for a component analysis, right? So there's some component of doing that, going through those exercises that was valuable, but we don't necessarily know what it was or if doing anything could be valuable versus nothing.
So that brings us to the question, gamification sounds cool. It sounds like it should work. It sounds like most of the components of games and gamification do follow a lot of the principles of behavior analysis in terms of changing human behavior, but we're still left with, well, it seems to kind of maybe work. but we're not quite sure why or how much it works. To review that, you need to look at a lot of studies, of which there are a number of them, but not all of them are what we'd consider real quality research. And that's really where the Hamari 2014 paper/talk comes in. This was the only sort of lit review that I know I could find when I was trying to look for more information about, does gamification work? And it looked at peer-reviewed papers that had some sort of an empirical study and used the term gamification. So I don't think the exergaming study would have gone into it necessarily, because there were only 24 papers as of 2014 that met that criteria. And it looked at sort of what research was done and sort of what parts of gamification were used. The main ones being most studies that had a gamification component had something about points or leaderboards or achievements or badges. Others had things like levels, goals. They gave feedback or rewards. They measured your progress, or they had some sort of a challenge component, like, hey, if you get the most of this, you're the winner, you're better than other people. There were a lot of studies that actually did report looking at behavioral outcomes. But again, this wasn't behavior analytic literature, so the way they discussed behavior outcomes, I don't think are the same way that we would discuss behavioral outcomes. Almost all of them had some sort of component of, did people report that they liked this process, or they had more motivation to engage in the gamified process than the non-gamified one? And pretty much what they found was that the most of the articles doing research on gamification showed some sort of benefit to using gamification versus not using gamification with whatever the tasks are. Now, a lot of times these tasks referred to educational or learning tasks. Most of the research has to do with how does gamification affect learning. Mm-hmm. Some had to do with change in energy consumption. So I think some of the Power Agent, Powerhouse, all those looking at people's knowledge, exercise and health, work with a task, use of data analysis. Really, the big themes came to all the studies showed some positivity to using gamification, some positive results in terms of using gamification.
Because it makes it so cool.
Yeah, and again, a lot of them had to do with the idea of engagement with this task increased. Right. But as we know, engagement with a task does not actually result in a meaningful change in human behavior. It was short-term, or a lot of people found that it was a short-term gain, not necessarily a long-term gain. It might have been a long-term game. I don't know if it was a long-term gain with that. Some folks did see some negative effects. So certainly if your task had to do with losing badges or losing points, people would report they didn't like those games. Or if the leaderboard was there, some people would stop playing if they realized, I'm never going to win this game or be better than other people, so why the hell would I keep doing this task?
That's me.
Yeah, that's me too. I don't want to
never win.
It's not fun to lose all the time. Gamification could backfire really bad if it's like, oh, but you were doing better at your box sorting behavior. Like, yeah, but I lost. I'm not on the leaderboard, so I'm not box sorting anymore. A lot of the research, though, had really small sample sizes. They didn't always use some sort of a validated measure to either describe the experience or describe what was happening. Sometimes they'd even just look at people's forum posts about whatever the gamified environment was. Apparently, a lot of businesses are using gamification and have some sort of internal social network. There were a bunch of articles that were reviewed. I didn't look at the articles themselves, just as part of this review, where they said, we're trying to increase our employees' use of our internal social network system, which even if you did see a change in that, what a totally worthless result.
Maybe not. So IBM is using it. I read that for their Beehive, and they really wanted people to start responding to the notices and messages because people weren't looking at them.
Oh, okay. That piece maybe. When they talk about social network, I'm like, what people talk about what they did on the weekend to their fellow employees, who cares?
Yeah, I think it's about actually accessing the important information that people may not have been accessing before.
Well, it could be a secondary measure for something else too, right? So we're trying to increase morale in the office. Other research suggests that's done through social interaction. Let's measure it this way.
Yeah.
But we don't know.
And some of the other big limitations in the overall sort of lit review was that many of the studies didn't have a control group. They might not have had a baseline. They didn't ever look at the components of gamification. It was just like, here's a bunch of stuff they did. So when you talk about gamification, that's very broad. If I add points to a boring task, technically I've gamified that task. It doesn't mean that I'm using meaningful gamification. And then the issue of novelty. So certainly if you go to work and your job is stamping license plates and all of a sudden your boss says, we're gamifying license plates, you might stamp more license plates that day because it's a change in pace. But if it's not meaningful, or it doesn't have key components of gamification. It's just, I'm going to give you 10 points for every license plate you stamp. That's fun for like 2 days. And then I would assume your license plate stamping behavior would fall back to baseline because you'd say, this is boring. These points don't mean anything and I don't care.
Right. What's the backup reinforcer?
Exactly. But we don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's all you need is points, and that'll change human behavior forever and ever. I don't think so.
Well, one thing that I loved, I don't know if we're going to talk about this a ton, about the Sailor and All article. Mm-hmm. So they're looking at does gamification work and what motivational variables. So they set it up as the job was so boring.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Jay, let's take a step back. Because that would be really the only article we haven't touched too much on. Yeah. Let's take a step back and talk generally about the purpose of that article, and then in terms of what they did. So the Sailor article was more an example of, okay, so we have some research on gamification works, a lit review saying that, yeah, it seems like gamification works, but we don't know how or why. And then the Sailor article really asking the question, why would gamification work? Mm-hmm. They unfortunately decided to use a lot of psychological, I think I wrote in my notes, some psychobabblish terms, some psychomological terms. So what they were looking at, I'm going to read these to you, and then I want you guys to try to translate into behavior analytic terminology.
I do want to say one thing about the introduction, They did say that video games inherently possess a high level of motivation, and that's not necessarily true, right? Because not everyone is motivated to engage in video games. Mm-hmm. So I think when I read that, I was like, not true.
That's not how we would define motivation.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So it's something like to think about. If you're going to read this article, read it through the lens of behavior analysis. So this would be a good practice for you to read a psychological paper and then rework it. Like, how would I then describe this to my friend who's a behavior analyst? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's what I think this would be a good test for you to do. Mm-hmm. Challenge.
So the purpose of the article was to ask, why would gamification work? Because there's a sense it does, but even if it does, we don't quite know why. And they looked at the idea of what they refer to as self-determination theory, which we're not going to get into because it is, again, it's a lot of mentalistic terms that don't mean anything necessarily.
But you have to, according to them, apply it to gamification.
Yes. So the terms they were looking at was humans seem to like games. And the reason they might like games is because humans are searching for a need for competence, a need for autonomy, and a need for social relatedness. So those were the terms that they decided to do a little research into which of these components relating to gamification might actually make gamification, quote unquote, work. So let's define those terms a little bit.
That gaming is reinforcing for most people.
Yes.
And that the end result reinforcers are those three things that you just named, right? Which is competence?
Yeah, so I'll give you a sense of kind of what that is. So competence would be some sort of a signal that you are doing well. You are succeeding at a task.
Like you're getting points, you're on the leaderboard, you see your behavior increase on the performance graph.
Or there may be challenges within a game.
Right.
And you're successful at completing those challenges or overcoming the obstacles within the game. I mean, I love puzzles, right? Any type of puzzle. I love it. I love the challenge of the puzzle. I love the satisfaction of completing the puzzle. And while you're doing it, you're like, oh, this is so hard. I can't wait to be done with it. And then the second you're done with it, it's like you get that rush of reinforcement and then you're like, I want to do another one right now.
So I think you hit two there, the need for competence and the need for autonomy. So if you're going to talk about behavior analytically, I think their need for competence, you're looking at it in terms of the reinforcers, right? So
satisfaction of completion
accessing,
is very reinforcing.
Yeah, and accessing those reinforcers by overcoming challenges. And then when you finish, like the outcome. So they say that the need for autonomy would include the experience of task meaningfulness. So when you complete that puzzle, you see the finished product, right? That in and of itself is reinforcing.
So that's autonomy?
Autonomy has more to task meaningfulness is what they meant when they talked about the need for autonomy. It was task meaningfulness and decision freedom, which to me sounded a lot like what would go into the components of gamification that had to do with choices.
So like self-determinism within the game. You get to make your own choices.
Yes.
Okay, great.
They used autonomy, but they meant both of those things when they referred to autonomy.
Okay, and we do know that choice is valued as a reinforcer, right? Across the board, across species, across ages.
Exactly.
People value choice. So being able to make choices about your behavior within the context of a game, I can see how that would be reinforcing.
Right.
And then the social relatedness, I think, is that is the most straightforward one. They're referring to the idea that we are reinforced by social interactions with others. Yeah, our behavior. Sorry, our behavior is reinforced by our social interactions with others.
I'm on board with that.
And that even included reinforcement through social interaction with a story, reinforcement with non-player characters, NPCs, who are just like made-up characters in a game. Just interacting with other people. Yeah, there's something about just any sort of interaction, even if you know it's not real, might have might reinforce your behavior.
Sure.
So
we are just very sophisticated monkeys. We like being with other monkeys.
Their experiment, Jackie. So let's go. So now we can get into the experiment itself. So they wanted to see.
So boring.
How will I measure these things? So they had to start with a gamified task.
So they picked literally the most boring task. So their task was the order picking process. So what they did is they wanted to see if somebody worked in a factory and received an order, could they complete the 5 to 6 steps to process that order, package it, and put it out. Like, how boring. They literally were like, what is the most boring thing to do? And they did that.
And then, depending on which hypothesis they were trying to test, they had different groups that would have different gamified components added to the task. Now, the game itself was online. It really looks like Excel spreadsheet, the game.
Horrible.
It's very dull.
Yeah.
It is literally just various boxes with like battleship, like C1 designations, and then you'd click around on it.
Because it's supposed to simulate the aisles and the materials in the warehouse. So
that sounds boring.
Look it up. Yeah,
it's a very boring looking game.
I'm playing a game right now that's just black and white grid.
Oh, there you go. So for the experimental control condition 1, they utilized badges, a leaderboard, and a performance graph. The control condition only had points for completing it necessarily.
And they only did points because they felt like, why would anyone continue clicking on this thing if it was just like, great job, you clicked on some stuff. So they had to do points.
And so one thing I didn't love is that I think that, so they separated, the control condition only had points. The experimental condition 1 had the badges, leaderboard, and a performance graph. And the experimental condition 2 had avatars, the story, and teammates. And the overarching story was they were helping with disaster relief, which then it makes it like...
I like that.
And it was like a picture. They did like a picture and then a little text box like, you are helping with disaster relief. I mean, and they were pretty honest. It wasn't much of a story, but it was a story.
A story better than, okay, here I work in this factory and I never want to have this job in my life, right?
And you could see little teammates, your virtual teammates. You could see little NPC characters going around the boxes. And then you could choose your avatar with that experimental condition too. But you were saying something you didn't like about that?
Yeah, something I didn't like about it is that I wish they would have had an experimental condition with everything in it and then pieced it out one by one, right? So here we know that one of the experimental condition works, one of them didn't work as well, but we still don't know why.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a package. It's a package for both of them, and we don't know which conditions are necessary or sufficient.
Yeah. So they had people play this game online. They recruited folks online, about 50-50 men and women, average age 22 years, and they'd sort of play one of the experimental conditions. And afterwards, they'd fill out a questionnaire relating to their psychological needs satisfaction. So it's all report Likert scales on, hey, did you feel that you had more social interaction than, when playing this game? They also asked specifically, did you notice these components of your condition?
Now, here's a question for you. When I read it, it seemed to me like when they said they didn't notice it, they took them out of the running. So
they didn't want to hear their thoughts on the Likert scale if they didn't realize those components were part of the game.
I actually don't agree with them there because
disagree.
A good gamification, you shouldn't notice the parts. It should just be part of the game, right? So I think they should have used them, pulled them out, and still tested them to see if there was any difference, right? Like that would have been interesting. If you're going to do a group design, dude, and not like analyze all your data.
Right, there doesn't need to be observation of a contingency for that contingency to have an effect.
Right, yeah.
Their thought process there was they specifically wanted to get the feedback about the gamified designs. But you're right, Jackie. The component that everyone would care about gamification, not like, hey, did you like the story? Did you notice it? How did it make you feel? So much as whether or not they noticed it, they either changed their behavior or didn't change their behavior.
Right.
And if it didn't change their behavior, who cares if they were like, I love this. If they say they love the story or didn't love the story, if it didn't change their behavior, doesn't matter.
Right. And one thing that they do posit, these authors posit that the awareness of the game design is crucial and should not be assumed, but they didn't really have anything to back that up on, right?
No, I
because
don't
they
see why
took
you'd
them out of their
need to know that.
analysis.
Yeah, we would disagree.
Wouldn't you rather have it be like, hey, guess what? Your job's a game. Isn't that great? It didn't used to be. We made it a game. But we don't
Right.
need to tell you that. As far as you're concerned, you have the best job ever.
Right.
And that's why your productivity is high and you report all these positive outcomes of the way your work is set up.
If it's a well design, right, you shouldn't need to necessarily know all of the different features of the design if it's well made. But anyway.
So when you looked, so you'd compare the results on the Likert scales for the different need conditions and psychological questionnaires. And anyone who was in the experimental condition 1 had a significantly higher report related to the questions about their feelings of competence, their feeling of satisfaction, their feeling of autonomy, and about the task meaningfulness. So again, in that condition, it was the badges, it was the leaderboards, it was the point. Well, they all had the points. But the badges and the leaderboards seemed to make people report that they felt better related to their ability to do the task, their autonomy needs, so, their choice, their amount of choice,
And the performance graph. They like that.
Yeah, the performance graph too. Experimental condition 2 showed, so they had the story, they had the avatars. They did report, the participants in that condition reported that they had a significantly higher report on the questions related to the social relatedness,
Right.
but not any of the other components. So
Right.
the kind of overall results point to, well, different elements might result in different changes in behavior. So points and leaderboards and performance graphs might result in better performance on a task. So, you click on more widgets, you engage in the task more, whereas having a story, having avatars might increase one's feelings or reported feelings of, oh, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I was doing it with other people. So it might increase the motivation to continue with the task.
Right.
They don't know. But again, I think the key component here is that, wow, gamification could be a number of different pieces of changing the task, and each one of those probably would result in a change in behavior in a possibly even predictable way. So if your goal is, I need them to click on the buttons more, you want to use your points in your leaderboards. A really great story about, hey, this is why you're clicking on the buttons might not change that behavior as much as you would like, even though it technically would fall into the category of gamifying the task. There were a lot of limitations, just like there are in all of these studies, one of which being that the dosage, I love when people use dosage when they're talking about this, the dosage of their story and avatars kind of sucked. Wasn't much of a story.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of limitations here, right?
Oh, but yes, but those are the ones that they specifically pointed out. Our story wasn't so great. The avatar choice didn't have anything to do with the game. It just changed how your character looked. So maybe you could change those components. But I think the key point here is, you know what? When we talk about gamification, we really are talking about a lot of different components that could result in a lot of different changes in behavior, and we should probably do more. Well, not us, we're just doing the podcast. You out there could do more research related to what do each of these components do, if anything.
Yeah, and Diana and I went to a talk on gamification at a conference, and there's some awesome stuff that people are doing around. Tara Fahmy is doing some work. It's not been published yet. Oh,
it was cool stuff, but
it was really
it's
cool.
not been published. It was in learning and education research, everything that we saw.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Or exercise. Some of them were exercise as well. That might have been a different talk.
Yep, that was a different talk, but we did
so
go.
there's work that's forthcoming. There's more behavior analytically oriented. It's just not ready yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The thing I always worry with a term like gamification, well, you know what? Before we do that, let's get into Dissemination Station. Click on the power up and win the game. You're in Dissemination Station.
David Wilder also does some work on gamification.
With employee training?
I think so.
The last time I saw him talk, he was doing a lot on employee training.
And David Madden has done some really interesting work looking at teaching healthy food choices to elementary school kids using a whole gamified story, right? So it's like a space battle, I think, is the last version of it that I saw. Mm-hmm. And it's gone through several different iterations, and it's published now, right, Jackie?
Yep, it's published in Preventative Medicine called The Fit Game, but we didn't have access to it.
Yes, and we didn't have time to get the article.
So
speaking of gamified, I'm not putting they should put quarters into the Elsevier and EBSCO host, and you could put the quarters in and play the Find Your Research Really Quick game.
That would be great.
We don't always just go to free articles, but sometimes time does not permit us to get in touch with the authors.
And we want our listeners to be able to access articles too.
Yes. When it comes to gamification, I feel like there are lots of great articles that are either ongoing, that have recently been published, that will hopefully get into the nitty-gritty of gamification. Because one of the things I always worry about when I hear about it's the new hot fad, is that it's going to be just that, a fad. It'll be something that everyone uses for a while. No one will quite know why it works, how it works. They'll just do a lot of it, and you'll get lots of mixed results. And at some point, someone will say, this is a lot of work. I'm not doing this anymore. Let's not do gamification. And then when people start coming out with the research of, here's how it works, and here's why, nobody cares anymore. Isn't gamification over? Didn't we stop doing that as a society? And that's always a danger.
And I think it's a buzzword right now, and you fall into the concern of not really understanding what it is that you're doing or what your end goal or product should be. So to me, we should really be backwards designing these types of studies and say, what do we want to actually do? What do we want to see change? And does gamification contribute to that versus the other way around, which is, let's see if we can gamify this thing. End product ? Which it seems like sometimes that's kind of the route that it's going. Oh, the other thing that we haven't mentioned is that when we went to the Thompson Center for Autism conference, do you guys remember that their whole conference app was gamified?
Yes.
Do you guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And you could post different things to social media, and you could get different awards and badges, and they had leaderboards, and you could get points. But I was never fully sure what the end goal was on their end.
I believe it was to increase social media interaction. I would
because you got extra points if you hashtagged, I think. Yeah.
It got us a lot of traffic because a lot of people came by to see us because some of the scavenger hunt kind of gamified pieces were like, find the smallest piece of swag. And we had our little ABA inside track buttons. So everyone said, that's the smallest thing here. So a lot of people came and talked to us. So
take a picture with someone you don't know. Was it one of them?
And so they come over. They say someone who's from out of town who had a small piece of swag and you don't know. And since it was in Missouri, we were from out of town, had a small piece of swag. Most people did not know us. So we got a lot of traffic.
Yeah. And the reinforcer for the participants in the game was they could win free registration for next year and some other cool stuff like that. So
it was fun.
It was cool.
I enjoyed interacting with it. It was a lot of fun. So it certainly, I would say, at least short term, changed my behavior. But again, it was meant to be short term. The conference was 2 days long, so you didn't need them to still be taking pictures of weird shaped curtains and posting it on the Thompson Center Twitter.
Still so many things we don't know about gamification. So did that make a change in people's behavior? It seemed to. But to what end? And then what was the most important pieces of all of that? Because there were so many different components going on there.
One thing that I would love to see that Jones and Madden does in one of their PLOS articles is that they have incorporate an entire section on how this relates to operant conditioning and how this relates to learning theory. And I like that because then it takes this traditionally psychological approach and behavior analytically describes it, but then gives it to us, right? Like gives it back to us. And I like that.
I even just think of something like that Classcraft example. It looks like it's meant to be more than just a behavior management system, but let's just look at the gamification of the behavior management system. Why not do a random control study where you have your Classcraft group, your group with a teacher who's just trained in using the same type of behavioral management technique. So they're just using some sort of a token economy in their classroom. They could still use technology. They just are tracking points. That's all. But it's not gamified. It's not meant to be like, oh, you're going to win you get a prize. You're going to get stickers, pencils, versus like in-game items. Versus the control group where it's just do your normal classroom management system. Or even a withdrawal with that sort of a design and just do some sort of let's try this first and see if there's a change. If there's not a change, let's do the Classcraft system. If there is a change, let's do a withdrawal. Something like that would be really great. And I would imagine Classcraft would want to get more research related to the work they're doing. Because again, what I could find on their website, it's not exhaustive. So this might actually exist or be in process. The research that they listed and that we could find was not really looking at outcomes, I think, the way we would want to see outcomes. It was a lot of teacher report. All the teachers reported
teacher report
that their students were coming to class more, that they were getting more work done. Were they getting better grades, though? were they
Right, what do we actually
did they
care
actually
about?
well, they were absent 4 times last semester, but then I put in ClassCraft and the average absence of students went down from 4.2 to 0 because and again, did you change anything else? So did you keep your teaching constant? The only thing you added was the ClassCraft system. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of room for doing some really meaningful studies about gamification that go beyond the sort of initial, is gamification worth exploring? Because I think the answer is yes.
I think so.
It's just a matter of, is it, but if you ask me, should I gamify my classroom? I'd have to say, I don't know, maybe.
It's so much work to gamify something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If you're making it from scratch.
Yes.
A lot. So that's something to think about.
Much work.
Diana's doing a pilot study right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. You want to know if this is worthwhile before you spend a lot of time and energy making something that either isn't effective or is not socially valid.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you do have to use elements of game design, which is not something that you just throw a token board.
It doesn't have to be high tech.
No, it doesn't have to be high tech, but you have to understand at least some basic elements of the games.
Yes.
And then implement those in your non-game environment. And if you don't know what those are,
but now you do.
Now you do, yeah. So now you could gamify.
And scene.
So gamification, an interesting addition, but we're not quite sure why and how. But that's coming along, we hope. We hope it continues to come along. Well, before we break, I want to make sure that our listeners are able to get that second secret code word if they're interested in applying for CEs, and it is PUCK. P-U-C-K.
You heard that right, folks. P-U-C-K.
U-C-K. A puck, like a hockey puck. Hey, Jackie, I already told Diana this anecdote, but would you like to hear it?
Yes.
As do gamification. You know the game Pac-Man?
Yep.
Originally, it was going to come out as Puck-Man because he's shaped like a puck. But everyone in Japan thought when we send this game to America, someone is going to eventually deface the P in Puck-Man.
Of course they are. I would have.
So they changed it to Pac-Man. And the rest is history. But don't write Pac, write Puck. P-U-C-K. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode on gamification. I want to thank Diana and Jackie so much for their research and discussion on this topic.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I also want to make sure to thank all of you listeners out there who took this gamified journey with us. Well, actually, we didn't gamify our podcast. That's a lie.
Everyone just earned 10 points.
Yeah, you all got 10 points for listening. Great job.
I'll deliver them to your house
Oh
personally.
my God, you right there. You're on the leaderboard. You're number 1.
I see you.
Put your initials in right now. The story was you wanted to listen to a podcast, and you did. Congratulations. The town is safe. ABA Inside Track is a weekly podcast. If you liked us, please feel free to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also leave us a review there. You can get in touch with us anywhere on social media. We're ABA Inside Track on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. You can also go to our website or YouTube page. There's abainsidetrack.com or ABA Inside Track on YouTube. And if you feel like sending us an email, either because you found a really cool gamification article that we totally missed and you think is worth discussing, or you yourself are doing work on gamification, hey, feel free to reach out at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with another exciting, story-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye.